Of religious folks that kind of lived in a commune sort of way back in the 1800s, and the men had to stay in one side of the building and the women had to stay in the other side with a big wall between it, and the women would go out to do their work in the fields and in the houses, and the men would go out and do theirs, and they weren't allowed to be married or be near each other. They even ate in separate little dormitory rooms, and it is a religious movement that, well, when you don't let men and women be together, it's going to die out. It died out. But the Shakers were called that because when they would worship, and especially sing this hymn, they liked this hymn, they would dance around. And the women would sit like in this section, and men on that section, and they'd clap their hands and they'd spin around and they'd dance and they'd be up and down and all that kind of stuff. Let's have a Shaker Sunday. Let's everybody get up and do that right now. You want to? Nobody wants to? Okay, we'll let it go this time. How's that? All right? Good. We United Methodists, we're not really like Shakers, are we? Getting up, dancing, spinning around, singing real loud and everything. We're more like people that look like they've been sucking on sour pickles. That's what I've been accused of anyway. I don't know. Well, I want to ask a question this morning, and that is, and this may not apply to everybody, but how many of you, when you think back on your childhood, how many of you would say to yourself that you really had a wonderful childhood? I know I would. Okay, look at that. Wow, that's pretty good. Yeah. How many of you have ever thought to yourself, man, I'd like to go back to those days again? Yeah. Yeah. I've thought about that lots of times, going back to those days. Realize that you can't. Something happens to us somewhere in that childhood, doesn't it? Everything is fun. Everything is bliss. You know you're going to be protected because mom and dad are there. I knew whenever I came home from school, mom was there, check in with her, have a snack, and then she'd lovingly tell you to get outside and play. And away you went. And in the summertime, you didn't have to come in until the street lights came on. And then if you begged hard enough, you could stay out a little bit later till you heard your name being called from the front stoop. Suppers were always terrific. Friends were always friends. And you had it made. But then something happens. Around the time you're maybe 11, 12, 13, somewhere in there, something called puberty kicks in. And the things that you used to love doing, you don't like doing so much. And the childish things that brought you a lot of fun, you discover are kind of childish. And you start doing this terrible, wonderful thing of growing up. And then you discover a world that's not all bliss and comfort, but responsibilities, desires. You want to start going your own way. You start to be held responsible if you stumble and fall for decisions you've made. And then when you get a little older, you think, boy, would it be nice to go back, be a kid again. But you realize you can't do it. That you have to live in a world where bad things happen to good people. A world that can be terrifically wonderful and horribly cruel. It's a great dichotomy, isn't it? Nothing wrong with growing up. And there's nothing wrong after you've grown up with wishing you could go back. It's when you try to go back and stay there and realize it just isn't going to work. How did all this happen? How do we understand going from that innocence into who we become today? There's a wonderful story in the New Testament. I mentioned earlier that if you really want to see the human condition, for all it's worth, with all of its joys and all of its foibles, and all of its family relationships that are terrific and family relationships that are really, wow, how did these people even exist with one another? It's all in the book of Genesis. And I like where it starts, these human relationships. It starts in a place called Eden. Now, we really don't know where Eden was. Scholars would say that it was probably somewhere where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers come together, and it's very lush, full of good things to eat, very green, fresh water, somewhere in that Iran-Iraq area, where all the bombs and bullets are flying right now. And it started, according to that terrific story in Genesis, it started with God creating this garden and creating all kinds of vegetation and all kinds of animals, and every day something being created, and God saying, and at the end of the day, and God saw that it was good. And then God decided late on one day, when he's just about finished with everything, to create human beings. I wonder if God really knew how bad he was going to mess up creation. But he created human beings, and the day that he created human beings, that evening, he looked around, took a deep breath, and said, he didn't say that was good. He said, and the Lord said, it was very good. Wow. Everything that was created out there by God was good. But when God created us, it was very good. How does that sound to you? And then God put them in the midst of that wonderful garden where they had everything they wanted. How would you like to have everything you wanted and you never had to work for it? That'd be great. Didn't have to go after retirement or benefits or Social Security. You never got ill. You got along with your Adam and Eve, got along. Can you believe that? That's probably the biggest thing we're puzzled by. You got one man here and one woman there, and they're in this perfect place, and they get along. Figure that one out. But there it all is. God's meeting all of their needs. You can go barefoot and not step on a thorn. You want a pepperoni pizza? There it is. Well, I'm stretching the metaphor, but you know what I'm saying. And then what happens? God gives them everything, and then God tells the two of them, in the midst of all of this perfection, all of this beauty, all of this providing for everything you could possibly want, water that tastes like Dr. Pepper, that would be Eden to me. It might be Gatorade for somebody else, I don't know. But it's perfect. There's no worries. It's absolute innocence. And then God plops a tree down, another tree, right smack in the middle of the garden. And it's gorgeous. And the Bible says the fruit on it really looks good. And then God says to them, that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They were so innocent they didn't know the difference. They didn't know there was good and evil. That's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat the fruit. Don't touch it, because on the day you do, you will surely die. Wow. Joe, when you were a kid, did your mother or grandmother ever bake something really good to eat? Okay. Or did they ever buy anything from the store that was good to eat? Sure. Oh, yeah. And did they ever have to tell you, this is for later, or this is for company, don't touch it? Put it right in the middle of the table, in the kitchen where you can see it, and they say, don't touch the Twinkies. Did you touch the Twinkies? Yeah, he did it. Come on, look at his face. He's got this little wry grin in his eyes going back and forth. How do you take something that you really want, that you really desire, that looks really good, plop drop it in front of people and say, don't touch it. Don't eat it. What is God doing here? Did God really expect them not to touch that? Did God not know what we're really like? Well, the story goes that Eve's wandering around. She gets close to the tree, and there's a big old serpent, it says, up in the tree. And if that's not curious enough, it starts to talk to Eve. And if that's not curious enough, Eve starts talking back. Ever had a conversation with a snake? I have. It's usually a scream and a yell and a get a shovel. Snake. But they start having this wonderful conversation. And I like what the serpent says. It says to Chuck, well, can't do that. It was talking to Eve. And you don't resemble Eve. It says to Peggy, did God really say you would die if you eat this fruit? You see, the serpent isn't telling Eve, oh, God didn't say that, or you can't believe God. It's planting a question in her heart. Did God really say that? And she said, yeah, that's what God said. God said, surely we'll die when we eat this. And the serpent says, no, you won't. And just like a little kid, that's good enough for her. Did Mom really say not touch the Twinkies? Oh, no, she didn't. And there goes a Twinkie. Okay? So she takes the fruit, she eats of it, and it tastes good. Now, we don't know what kind of fruit it was. And Johnny Appleseed wasn't around, so get the apple thing out of your mind. It didn't happen that way, okay? It was something else. Pomegranate or something, I don't know. But it was really good. And what does she do with it? She brings it to Adam and says, hey, Adam, this stuff is good. And since you like mincemeat pie, you'll love this fruit. And he takes a bite of it and goes, whoa, this is good stuff. And then what happens? They look at each other and they go, you're not wearing any clothes. And they freak and they hide and they make clothes for themselves. And they hear God coming. I love the imagery. God is coming to take a walk in the cool of the evening. Going for a garden walk in the cool of the evening. You ever done that? It's terrific. And he sees all the beauty of everything, but he can't find Adam and Eve, so he calls out to them. And finally, Adam answers, I'm over here. What are you doing behind the bush? Well, we heard you coming and we're naked and we were really embarrassed. Who told you you were naked? In other words, oh no, they've grown up. They're not the little kid that plays in the mud puddle anymore. They've grown up. How did this happen? Didn't I tell you not to eat of that? Didn't I tell you to stay away from the Twinkies? And I like, you've heard this before, I like Eve's answer. This is where passing the buck is first seen, okay? Eve says, the serpent did it. The serpent talked me into it, okay? That's her excuse. We love to throw excuses around for our behavior, don't we? The serpent did it, okay? And then Adam's, I like his response even better. He one-ups her. He does what most men would do. He blames not the serpent. He doesn't blame one individual, he blames two. He says, the woman that you gave me. Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? The woman that you gave me. Man, they're getting rid of any responsibility, aren't they? And so God says, all right, you made the choice. Can't live in the garden anymore. You're done growed up. If that's how you put it down south, John. You're done growed up. And he throws him out of the garden. And he says to Adam, not going to provide for you anymore. You got to provide for your family and yourself, and it's going to be hard work, and you'll earn your bread by the sweat of your brow, and you'll try to till the soil, and thorns and weeds will come up, and it's not going to be an easy life. And then he says to the woman, your punishment is pain in childbirth. Wow, I'm glad guys didn't get that one. I've seen it. I don't want it. I'll work in the field. And then he says to the serpent, who really gets off easy, I think, you're going to crawl on your belly the rest of your life, all your days. Wasn't he already doing that? It's interesting, isn't it? The world discovers a radical change in this story of Adam and Eve. What is going on here? How do we understand it? Some people say, well, this is where sin entered the world, and that's why we're sinful people, because of who? Who really takes the rack down through history for all the sin in the world? Eve. Eve. Oh, woman. Sin comes into the world because of a woman. How's that make you feel? Women? You get blamed for everything, don't you? You know what? I think there's more to the story than that. I think there's a lot more to the story than that. That's why I love these stories in the Bible, especially Genesis. That these stories weren't really meant to tell us of something that happened 5,000, 6,000 years ago. They were meant to tell us something about ourselves. When we read the Adam and Eve story and pay attention to it, we realize there was a time when we lived in absolute innocent bliss. It's called childhood, where everything is taken care of for us, where mom and dad will make the decisions. Can I go to the movies tonight? And as a mother, she would say what mothers say. Go ask your dad. But they made the decisions for you. You had a place to sleep, food in your belly, clothes on your back. You didn't have to make any decisions. But then something happens. You eat of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You start going your own way. You start pushing the boundaries. You start wanting to grow up. As a matter of fact, you can't help it. You start to grow up. And as St. Paul says, the childish things are put behind me, and I become a man or a woman. When you hear man in the Bible, it's usually Adam, which means human being. You become an individual. And you know what? I think that's what God wanted. I really do. I think there was a reason God put that tree in there. So that we would have the choice to either stay in innocent bliss or to grow up and be able to choose our own way. Choose what's right. Choose what's wrong. Choose to acknowledge that there is a God. Choose to say, no, there isn't. How many of you have kids? How many of you have ever been a kid? That pretty well covers it, doesn't it? Those of you that have children, when they're little, they adore you, don't they? And they want to please you. And if you could make your children, if you could will them to perfectly love you all the time without straying from that, if you could program them to be perfect in all that they did, what kind of love would that be for you from them? It wouldn't be love that they chose to give, would it? It would be love they were programmed to give. I want love that they choose to give me. When they ate of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they now have a choice how they're going to live life. A choice whether they're going to love people or hate people, love God or reject God. When she took that bite and gave it to Adam, we call it the fall. Yeah, rightfully so. It was a fall into consciousness. God says that we were made in the image of God. Yeah. We have a conscience. We know right from wrong. We even are born with the knowledge that there is a God, no matter how hard we want to reject that. We're born with that knowledge that there is. And we have the choice of giving ourselves to God or purposely rejecting. We have a choice of loving others or not loving others. We have a choice to become all that God would have us be or to reject that. And as we look back at our lives, no matter how old we are, we will see things that we don't like in our life. We will look at our lives today and we'll say to ourselves, I can't help it, I've always been like this, or look what this person's done to me, or I was raised that way, this is just who I am. Nonsense. The gospel message is you have a choice. You can remain who you are, or you can give yourself to God and become a new creation. Fall into God consciousness and become whole, not broken. These are great stories in the Old Testament. They are meant to tell us something about ourselves. We cannot read them without seeing ourselves. If we do read them and not see ourselves in them, we're not reading them close enough, are we? Part of my Bible study coming up in the fall is going to deal with a lot of these wonderful old stories. You have a choice. What's it going to be? Let's pray. Gracious God, we come before you just as we are. We're broken, we know it. We make choices that we ought not make. We have fallen into consciousness. We know right from wrong. We know now, whether we admit it or not, we need you. For we're not anywhere near wholeness. Help us, O God, through Christ our Lord.